I mean, I think the fascinating story of the day today is we know that the Conservative Party have made overtures to Boris Johnson because whatever you think about Boris, he's got a certain kind of populist popularity,
Yeah.
and he's a great campaigner. They want him to hit the streets. He did sign a few letters, but we learned today, where is Boris during Rishi Sunak's hour of need? Oh, I know, Sardinia, with his family on holiday. And Carrie, in what I think is a pretty pointed message to the Prime Minister, said, beautiful Sardinia, what was it, pasta, ice cream, beach, repeat.
And she might just as well have said "hasta la vista,"
Yeah,
mightn't she? Or
there's a picture of them
whatever
on
the
the
equivalent is in wherever they are. Lovely picture. I mean, look, as you said in your introduction, what goes around comes around. I wrote a few months ago, there's no way Boris was going to come back and bail out our Rishi, because Rishi, stabbed Boris in the back. So why would he do that? He's just letting it all play out from a nice sun lounger, or enjoying the sunshine and waiting to see, just how badly this goes for the man that did him in. Can't blame him, really, can
you? No,
you?
you can. I think we've got, we may not, but I hope we've got Rishi Sunak's announcement when he resigned when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And this was soon after the Chris Pincher groping scandal at the club, the Carlton Club, wasn't it? And Boris tried to sort of batten down the hatches on a situation that was unsavable. And but Rishi Sunak quit. And that was really the end. There's his resignation letter, and he quit, saying that government should be transparent, sensible, and so on and so forth. And I take this very seriously, and therefore I'm having to resign. Now that was the final knife into Boris's back. His allegedly loyal lieutenant, his Chancellor of the Exchequer, saying "I quit," and that killed off Boris's prime ministerial career, and like an elephant, he hasn't forgotten.
No, and fair enough. But I do wonder whether Boris would really have quite the pulling power on the campaign trail now anyway. I think there are still a few people that think Boris is great, and he is always very entertaining. When he stands up and talks, he is funny, he's engaging. But he is fatally tarnished, I think, by the whole Partygate scenario. Far too many people still feel, quite rightly, furious that whilst they were obeying the rules and being made to suffer appallingly by not being able to see dying loved ones and not being able to reunite with people and all the other things that everybody put up with during lockdown, Boris Johnson and his team were merrily stuffing suitcases full of bottles of wine for this leaving party or that celebration of this or that. And I just don't think that if he did go on the campaign trail, he might not be booed in some places.
Exactly. This is what Rishi Sunak said when he quit as Chancellor in 2022. As I say, this was the death blow to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, at the time. So he suddenly resigned and said, "The public rightly expects the government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. I recognise this might be my last ministerial job, but I believe these standards are worth fighting for. This is why I'm resigning." What he's actually saying is, get rid of this guy, I'll take the job. Yeah. That's what that was about. A lot of Tories never forgave him for that treachery. But I think you're right about Boris Johnson. What I've been surprised about, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I can't get that worked up about Partygate and the fact that Boris had a bit of cake. I think it was a terrible look. It was symptomatic of his shambolic leadership that he allowed these parties to happen. But personally, I can think of worse crimes. But around the country, I've noticed, doing this show, taking phone calls, people are still furious about Partygate.
They really are.
It's a massive factor.
Yeah, I mean, I was peripherally linked to a breach of rules allegedly on the Isle of Wight, and people still bring it up the whole time. The MP for the Isle of Wight was also drawn into that, and he is constantly being goaded about
Bob
it.
Seeley? Is that
even years on, no one was ever fined as an outdoor thing. It was too trivial for words. but people viscerally feel that this was wrong. And, I'm not a politician. I certainly wouldn't have been even breaking the spirit of the law if I were a politician. And I'd been in any way responsible for these awful lockdown rules and regulations. But I think for those who were in charge or who sat back and let those rules go through, because of course they could have stood up and resigned, even if it wasn't their idea to impose these rules. If they'd had a problem with them on a point of principle, as I certainly did many of the rules, they could have stood up and said so. None of them did. These COVID laws went through absolutely on the nod. And even those like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who subsequently said, oh, it was all, I'm paraphrasing here, but a lot of this was a load of nonsense and I didn't agree with it and it was appalling, never said so at the time.
I know. We're going to be talking about that a little later, because Rees-Mogg, David Davis, Robert Jenrick are now leading calls to have all COVID fines sort of cancelled so that people don't have a criminal record. But I think that a lot of people who obeyed the rules, that didn't mean to say you agreed with the rules. I mean, I can't say that I followed them to the letter, but I suppose I did my best, mainly because of other people, because the neighbours are all doing it, and you know what I mean. So while I think people's attitude is, whether or not you agreed with those ludicrous draconian rules that were getting people fined for talking to their friends, ridiculous, whether or not you agreed with them, most people, the vast majority of people, were trying to obey the rules, and then they looked to Downing Street and thought, oh, okay, so it's one rule for us and a different rule for Boris and his mates.
And it's just an awful look. And, there are ways you could justify that in a sense because of the way Downing Street's laid out and this and that and the other. But in the end, the whole nation was having an absolutely wretched time, and it appeared that those at the top were actually having quite a good time.
Indeed.
And I think they were. Actually, you know what? I think they secretly, I think a lot of them loved that period because they were in charge and they were absolutely punch drunk on power.
They really were. I'm thinking Matt Hancock, somebody that I think you know quite well. But seriously, yes. The other thing I think about Boris Johnson, we have to go to break now, but I think proper conservatives are realising he's not for them. He's not a proper he's not a Tory, he's a Lib Dem Green fanatic. Yeah,
completely. I mean, the split in the party isn't between Boris Johnson as a kind of talisman on the right and some one nation lefties. Boris Johnson wouldn't even know the right if it smacked him in the face, which it politically has been doing. He was one of these people that was always on the one hand and on the other, wasn't he? I mean, this is a man who actually, as London mayor, called for an amnesty on illegal immigrants. Do you remember that?
Yes, I forgot.
Yeah, brilliant
I do
policy.
now. Yeah.
Can you imagine calling for that now? How that would go down?
He's a metropolitan liberal, isn't he? Basically.
Yeah.
And that's another reason.
Who never was fully believing in Brexit.
I think the Talk audience, that they were. I was dismayed when he got kicked out. I thought it was a major political mistake. However, I think time is a great leveller, and I think people have realised two things about him. Partygate, he won't be forgiven for. He thinks he should be. It's not a piece of cake. It was more than that, mate. It was more than that. And secondly, he's not a conservative. So
the second crime is much worse.
Yes, in our view, definitely. And I think we're right.